Good morning. As I stand up here, I'm struck by the feeling that there's already so much to be grateful for today. This music, the sunshine outside. I was, before the service, back by the doors, and I smelled spring, and it seems like it's finally stuck, so we can rejoice about that. Welcome to First Parish in Brookline. We are a congregation who is mostly on retreat at Cape Cod this weekend. That's where our senior minister is. And we have the delight this morning of experiencing a lay-led worship service. Our music director, Keith Kirchhoff, put this service together, so it's a special morning to experience his unique ministry. Thank you, Keith. So, First Parish in Brookline, we are not connected by creed, but we are connected by love and building community in the name of social justice and caring for our living earth. So whoever you are on your faith journey, in your life, whatever mood you're in, whatever you carry with you today, you are welcome here. We hope you'll join us for coffee hour down the hall through this door right here after the service, if you're so inclined. And we hope you enjoy our service today. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is taken from the writings of Pauline Oliveros. Sounds carry intelligence. Ideas, feelings, and memories are triggered by sounds. If you are too narrow in your awareness of sounds, you are likely to be disconnected from your environment. More often than not, urban living causes narrow focus and disconnection. Habit has narrowed listening to only what seems of value and concern to the listener. Animals are deep listeners. When you enter an environment where there are birds, insects, or animals, they are listening to you completely. You are received. Your presence may be the difference between life and death for the creatures of the environment. Listening is survival. Today's worship service is about listening. Listening deeply and intentionally. Listening with presence and listening with patience. Listening to the sounds you would normally ignore. Listening to the sounds in between the sounds. Listening to the space. Listening to the silence. I encourage you to listen this morning with new ears, to listen to every sound, those intended and those unintended, to listen as if for the first time. In this space, there is no unwanted sound. There is only sound. This opening hymn is a chant. I invite you to stand as you're willing and able and to listen to the tune, listen to the words. We'll hear the melody in the saxophone, and I will sing the chant. I will sing it several times. As you start to become comfortable with the song, please join in singing. Let's rise.
In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is hope. In the silence there is love. In the silence courage. courage rest. In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is hope. In the silence there is love. In the silence courage rest. In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is hope. In the silence there is love. In the silence courage rest. In the silence there is peace. In the silence there is hope. In the silence there is love. In the silence courage rest.
At this time, I would like to invite Laura Walters to come forward to light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith the world over. As she lights the chalice, please join me in our unison affirmation printed in your order of service in English and then in Spanish. We give ourselves one unto another, covenanting to walk together as a congregation, promising faithfully to watch over one another and to delight for love to abide in our midst. Nos entregamos y nos comprometemos a caminar juntos como congregación, prometiendo con mucha fe cuidarnos mutuamente y deleitarnos en el amor que permanecerá entre nosotros. Each week we also light 2 candles of peace, each candle representing a different place on earth that we want to lift up and remember this morning as a sacred encounter with the world. There are untold numbers of places on earth that need peace. Today we remember those 2 places that we especially hold close in this service and in the week ahead. After each of the candles is lit, we will speak the words for peace in English, Arabic, and Hebrew: peace, salam, shalom. Our first candle is lit for Jefferson City, Missouri, where 3 people were killed and many more were injured in a tornado storm system that has been sweeping the Midwest. Peace, salam, shalom. Our second candle is lit for Venezuela, home of many migrants who are now in the US and may be able to apply for temporary protected status after the House Judiciary Committee passed a bipartisan bill this week. Peace, salam, shalom. There is no such thing as an empty space or empty time. There is always something to see, something to hear. In fact, try as we may to make a silence, we cannot. For certain engineering purposes, it is desirable to have as silent a situation as possible. Such a room is called an anechoic chamber. It's 6 walls made of special material, a room without echoes. I entered one at Harvard University several years ago and heard 2 sounds, one high and one low. When I described them to the engineer in charge, he informed me that the high one was my nervous system in operation, the low one, my blood in circulation. Until I die, there will be sounds, and they will continue following my death. One need not fear about the future of music. Deep listening is a practice that is intended to heighten and expand consciousness of sound and as many dimensions of awareness and attentional dynamics as humanly possible. Deep listening comes from noticing my listening, or listening to my listening, and discerning the effects on my body-mind continuum, from listening to others, to art, and to life. Deep listening is a form of meditation. Attention is directed to the interplay of sounds and silences, or the sound silence. Sound is not limited to musical or speaking sounds, but is inclusive of all perceptible vibrations and sonic formations. The relationship of all perceptible sounds is important. The practice is intended to expand consciousness to a whole space-time continuum of sound silences. Deep listening is a process that extends the listener to this continuum as well as to focus instantaneously on a single sound or sequence of sound silence. In order to acquire the discipline and control that meditation develops, relaxation as well as concentration is essential. The practice of deep listening is intended to facilitate creativity in art and life through this form of meditation. Creativity means the formation of new patterns, exceeding the limitations and boundaries of old patterns, or using old patterns in new ways. Compassion, spiritual development, and understanding comes from listening impartially to the whole space-time continuum of sound, not just what one is presently concerned about. In this way, discovery and exploration can take place. New fields of thought can be opened, and the individual may be expanded and find opportunity to connect in new ways to communities of interest. Practice enhances openness.
The offertory will now be gratefully received. For any of you who are visiting First Parish for the first time, please let the basket pass you by. We are just so happy to have you here. For all that has been given and all of your generosity, we say thank you. I am curious who here has recently been on a first date? Anybody willing to raise their hand and say sometime within the last 6 months you have been on a first date? Excellent. 2. So, now to the 2 that didn't raise their hand, who can think back and remember a first date? I'm sure many people. Well, I, as a man who has been going through various states of single for the last 6 years, I can tell you I have been on a lot of first dates. I have been on many fewer second dates and regrettably few sixth dates, but I have been on a lot of first dates. And if you think back to some of these recent first dates you may have had, or if you think back upon some in the past, occasionally they go really well. If you end up with maybe eventually if you're married or have a partner, you probably had to get on a first date to be to that state. So somewhere along the line it went well. But for a lot of people, and most of the time, first dates are awful. They are just the quintessential source of all awkwardness and discomfort you could possibly have. In our modern era of online dating, I think it makes it even more difficult because you haven't met the person in advance. You see a picture, maybe it's just a picture that you see, and you're like, ooh, I like that. Or maybe you've gone through the online algorithms and the site has determined you two are an 85% match. And you think, all right, and you have a little conversation and you say, all right, well, this person isn't totally crazy. We seem to both like Marvel movies, so all right, maybe we'll get together. And so if you're anything like me, you've showed up to that date, scouring everything there is to learn about their profiles, and I've cataloged in the back of my head a ton of questions, because all I want in this first date is for conversation to just kind of flow. I've got no goals beyond that. I just don't want conversation to just stop. So, all right, so you pick a place, you get together, and there's that sort of awkward hug because you kind of feel like you're supposed to hug, but you don't know this person. You've never met them before, but you're like, hey, good to meet you, for real. And you sit down, and you order a drink, you order some food. Conversation's okay. And it starts to slow down a little bit, but that's all right. I've got my catalog of questions in the back of my head. But then it starts to slow down a little more, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm running out of questions. No. And it stalls again, and soon, before you know it, the dreaded silence has settled in. What do I do? My mind is racing. It's like I'm out of questions. I don't know what to talk to this person about. Let's see. Okay, baseball season. I love oh, shoot, I remember. We talked about this online. She doesn't like baseball. Okay. The beer. Well, we've already talked about beer. Oh, I know. This is the perfect time for me to go get another beer. Darn it, I still have half a beer. I can't get a beer yet. I'm stuck here. Oh, man, and you're just set there in the silence. As a culture, we are terrified of silence, not just in a first date setting, which is really its own, sociological experiment unto itself, but really as a general culture, we are terrified of silence. We are filling ourselves with sound at every opportunity to try to keep the silence away. Maybe from the moment we get up, we're turning on the radio or the television. We go outside, we pop our earbuds in, we're listening to podcasts or we're listening to music. I know a lot of people leave, especially, I grew up in the Midwest, especially a lot of families in the Midwest will leave the television on all day, whether anybody's in the room or not. I have an old roommate in college who slept to reruns of The Simpsons, just kind of on perma-loop, and I know a lot of people sleep with white noise generators because that little bit of noise in the background just helps you sleep. We all are trying to fill the silence with something. In my collaborations here with all of the various ministers I've gotten to work with here at First Parish, it's something we talk about a lot as well. Oh, we're going to have a laying on of hands, or there's going to be some movement. Well, we better fill that space with some music or something. We don't want just silence. We're so afraid of it. Yet, I wonder, if we were to take the earbuds out, if we were to turn the radio off, I bet we would be surprised to discover that there really wasn't silence at all, and that there was actually probably a lot to listen to. John Cage is a fairly well-known composer of the 20th century, in my mind one of the preeminent creative thinkers and musical philosophers that have really ever come through our world. And as we heard in the first reading, he talked really throughout his life about two primary gospels. One was that there is no such thing as silence, and the second is that what we perceive of as silence is actually beautiful and deserves to be listened to. So, there's no such thing as silence, John Cage says. He says, rather, silence is not the lack of sound, but the lack of intended sound. And he talks a lot, throughout his life, you can pretty much every interview with him or every lecture he gave, he was talking about that story we heard about him visiting the anechoic chamber at Harvard. He goes in there, it's supposed to be designed to be completely devoid of sound. It is absolute zero in the sonic sphere. Yet he goes in, he hears sounds. He hears his heart. He hears his bloodstream. I'm sure he heard his breathing, although he didn't talk about that. And he takes away this great observation that so long as there is life, there is sound. And then he goes a step further. So long as there is sound, there is music. So Cage also lectured a lot about how he loved to sit by the window of his 6th Avenue apartment building in Manhattan. And he would always say that he found the sound of New York traffic to be significantly more beautiful than any symphony of Mozart or Beethoven. Now, some of you chuckle, and I'm sure most of us here probably aren't going to share that opinion, and we'd rather go to Symphony Hall than a 6th Avenue park bench. But he does offer an interesting perspective and a true wisdom that I think is worth paying attention to. If we actually found all the sounds around us to be beautiful, wouldn't we be a significantly happier people? If every time I left the house I didn't have to do anything, but I was just surrounded by beautiful sound, what a great space to be in. What a great world to live in. Anxiety goes down. I'm just surrounded by beauty. Well, I know what you're thinking. Well, that's a neat idea, but no, I do not find traffic, the sound of traffic, to be beautiful, and I never will. And you know what? I kind of agree. I hate the sound of a jackhammer ripping up the road, and I did my grad degree at NEC, and they were always ripping up Huntington Avenue for something. Oh my God, I hated it. There was this fellow across the way who decided that the world wanted to hear him sing karaoke every day at 2 p.m. He would take his shirt off, open up his window, and just point the speaker right outside and just start singing. No one in that school liked that guy. We have no idea who he was. Or here's one that routinely drives me nuts. You're sitting on the subway, and there is some individual on there who's decided to have a phone conversation on speakerphone, talking so loudly as if the whole subway wanted to be a part of that conversation. I always want to go over and just sit down and start talking as if I'm the other person on the other end. I haven't yet. These sounds are so frustrating. How? There's this disconnect. How can we possibly find that space of peace that Cage talks about if we're surrounded by such noise? Well, Pauline Oliveros had a solution for this. She developed this spiritual practice called deep listening. The idea of deep listening was to not try to block sound out, but to invite sound in, to listen intently to everything around you. Now, unlike Cage, so Cage argued that all sound was music, Oliveros is not striving for music. She actually says that sound is sound and music is a welcome byproduct of any of these practices. If it happens, cool. If not, that's also cool. For her, the practice of listening, and really just listening, was in and of itself enough. So she designed a series of exercises, etudes if you were, that helped a person guide their listening throughout the day. And she really developed this spiritual practice. And the key word in there is practice, because practice implies that you have to do it over and over, and practice implies that you are imperfect at it. If you're perfect, you don't need to practice. Spiritual practices do not demand perfection. They don't demand that you immediately can go outside and just listen to everything and be at peace, but they do demand routine, attention, a presence, an intentionality to the world around you. So musicians are kind of naturally suited in a unique way to listening. One may think, especially if you are not a musician, that the bulk of a musician's time is spent trying to get their instrument better. You know, a pianist spending time with finger exercises. Yes, that's true. You do have to strengthen your muscles. But the muscle that musicians are exercising the most are their ears. In the Paulina Oliveros piece we played during offertory, she gives us a set of instructions on how we have to listen to each other. That when one person goes up in pitch, another person has to go down. That we have to be creating a sound simultaneously without talking about it ahead of time. It requires really intentional listening. Musicians are, of course, trained also to listen to the most acute sonic details that most people just don't pay attention to. You're a little sharp. Bring that down. You're a little too fast. You're a little too loud. And it makes sense. If we're, with the exception of singers who have text, musicians are trying to use sound to express themselves, to try to bring something and share something of themselves through just sound. Critical listening is critical. But it's different than deep listening. And I actually think that deep listening is harder for musicians than it is for non-musicians. Because musicians are critical listeners. And we may just, we may not talk about it if we go to a concert or if we're hanging out with our friends or if we're hearing some musical act, because we don't want to always just be that guy. But we're always criticizing everything we hear. If you are a professional musician, you cannot turn it off. But deep listening isn't about that. There isn't too high, there isn't too fast, there isn't too loud. It's just sound, and it's wonderful. To deep listen, you do not need to be a musician. You do not need to know any instrument. You don't need to know any music theory. You don't have to know any lyrics. You don't have to be able to name any bands or famous composers. You don't need to have any training whatsoever. All you do need to have, though, is a presence, patience, and a willingness to listen. In 1952, John Cage premiered what is probably his most famous piece, some would say infamous piece, and that is 4 minutes, 33 seconds. Now, some people call it the silent piece, which I find a very unfortunate name, given he spent his whole life trying to convince us there was no such thing as silence, and then people kind of name his piece the silent piece. Anyhow, I digress. The piece invites a performer to go on stage and for precisely 4 minutes and 33 seconds do absolutely nothing. The music is the sounds that happen in the hall. Whatever sounds occur, that's the music. And that's his point, that there is no silence. Even though this person's doing nothing, you're going to hear something, and if you listen to it, it'll be beautiful. So the premiere was performed by the pianist David Tudor in 1952. And he walks out on stage to a nice applause, takes his bow, sits at the piano, and does nothing. The music begins. It was a rainy day with the sound of rain on the roof. There's a sort of natural crescendo as people start getting a little restless. They kind of shuffle their paper. They start whispering, "Why isn't he doing anything? What's happening?" And it must have felt like hours to them. It was not even 4 minutes before they got to the climax of the piece, which was them starting to throw things, yelling, and storming out of the hall. So Cage was asked later what he thought of the premiere, and he actually really liked it. And why not? It was a beautiful musical progression from rain to restlessness to rage. It was perfect, except that the entire audience wasn't able to be present enough to stop and listen to it or to even realize that it was going on, and they really missed the entire thing. So let's go back to these exercises that Oliveros has. How do we get to be in a state of listening, where we can absolutely listen and listen with presence? Maybe, it really is a form of meditation, and maybe you have a lot of meditative practices already, and you're like, I don't have room for another one. Or maybe you think, I'm not good at meditating. I have a really hard time kind of quieting down. Well, Oliveros' sonic meditations are not about a quiet mind meditation. I don't have to empty my mind of all thought. Rather, it's the opposite. I have to focus my mind towards a particular thought, that of listening to a particular sound. These exercises are things you can take with you out into the world. You can do them throughout your day. I want to share a couple of them. She asks that you do one a day, and she has a whole bunch of them. This is a lovely book for anyone who wants to explore this further. Deep Listening, it's titled, A Composer's Sound Practice. And I want to read a couple of them that she has in there. Listen to any sound as if it had never been heard before. That's a cool idea. We've all been there at some point. At some point in our lives, we heard a sound for the first time. Can you reimagine your existence or interaction in the world to try to hear a sound as if it were brand new? Think about the wonder that can bring. I like this one a lot. In a group or crowd, can you hear with their ear? So here at First Parish with our choir, we've often sung a song, Walk in Your Neighbor's Shoes, this idea that let's try to see the world through another person's eyes. Well, that's a neat idea, but have we considered hearing the world through another person's ears? It really shifts your focus on how you interact with that person. When you start hearing what they hear, maybe you realize what you're saying is different than what you thought it was. Maybe you can start to understand how your words could be interpreted differently or could be met with a different set of expectations than what you have. Really taking yourself out of your body and your mind to be listening to those around you. Here's another one. What is the longest sound you heard today? The longest sound. Not the loudest, but the longest. None of these really by themselves are all that profound, but when they are really taken truly and internalized, they become really transformative. Your whole interaction with the world changes because you're not there to block out the sounds. You're not there to ignore the sounds. You're there to listen to them and to affirm them. And when you affirm the sounds and give them worth, you also are affirming the life that's behind that sound. And that really is kind of similar to one of our Unitarian Universalist principles about affirming the worth and dignity of all living things. That is what this is doing. It's giving us that ability to affirm the life behind the sound. Here's one of my favorite ones. Imagine a sound that you want to hear. During a designated time, such as a day or night, take note of when and where you hear the sound. I like this one because it's a sonic scavenger hunt. You are deciding, all right, I am going to listen for, I'm going to listen for someone's cell phone going off. All right, now, instead of trying to ignore the sound of someone's cell phone going off, you're going through your day trying to find every occurrence of it. It actually becomes kind of fun. And it changes the way you interact with the world because you have to hear it. You have to hear everything in it if you're going to hear those things that we usually block out or get buried. So I want to try one together. And this one is a little different than the ones I read in that this is one of her pieces, if you were. It was composed in 1989 and it's called New Sonic Meditation. And the idea with this one is we are all going to participate. It is a participatory exercise, and it's possible that it's going to be a little foreign to some of you, like something you've never done before, and that's okay. It might make you uncomfortable, and that's okay too. Remember, a practice requires practice, and this might be the first time you've done something like this, and that's wonderful. So the way that this exercise works, I will be ringing the bell, and you are invited to breathe and to listen. And then, with any one breath, make a sound. Any sound. Could be verbal, could be percussive, It could be anything. And then listen and breathe. And then I want you to listen outwardly. Listen to all the sounds in the room and find a person and listen to that person's sound. And I want you to imitate that sound, whatever it is. And then you will again listen and breathe. Then I want you to listen inwardly, where you are listening to all of the sounds, but listen to them and let them all enter your body, and try to hear a sound, rather try to create a sound that you haven't heard yet. Something new, something different. And then listen and breathe and repeat. Now, you're saying, oh my gosh, I've already lost track of it. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, we've got, Noah will be going through all of those steps kind of slowly on the screen. And again, just to kind of summarize, we listen, we make a sound, we imitate the sound, and then we create a new sound that no one else has done. Don't be afraid of the silence or space between the sounds. That's wonderful space. Just listen to it. Just breathe. If you find yourself getting impatient or restless, that's okay. But breathe and center yourself and let yourself just be in this space. And if you're uncomfortable, think, well, why am I uncomfortable? What about this is uncomfortable? And affirm those feelings. There's nothing wrong with that feeling. There's nothing wrong with that experience. And be creative with the sound. There is no wrong sound. There is nothing wrong that will happen in this space. All that happens is sound, and we affirm all of that sound. We will listen together. We'll begin when I ring the bell, and when I ring the bell again, we will come out of the New Sonic meditation. So, let's begin. Do you remember the last sound you heard before this question? Do you hear yourself in daily life? Are you listening right now, or are you just hearing? Let's engage in a different type of sonic practice now, and let's sing together our closing hymn. It's Abide With Me. The words will be projected on the screen. They're also in your order of service. I encourage you to rise as you're willing or able and join in singing together. Help me to listen to the sounds unseen, the fire in the silence, in the space between, hearing the stillness intentionally. Spirit of life and sound, abide with me. May I find beauty in the smallest sounds, and find the joy in the noise that surrounds, bursting with sonic creativity. Spirit of life and sound, abide with me. So listening with purpose and fearless intent, hearing the whispers of radiant wonderment, finding the music that roars from sea to sea. Spirit of life and sound, abide with me.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join me in our unison affirmation. We extinguish the flame and not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us and offer as gifts unto the world.
Our benediction is again borrowed from John Cage. He says, listen to a sound, and if you find it boring, listen for 2 minutes. If it's still boring, listen to it for 4. If it's still boring, for 8, 16, 32. Eventually, you find that the sound isn't actually boring at all. Go forth and listen to the world. Amen, and blessed be.
Amen.